Several titles to this project were considered. A History for Perspective, Pressed for Time, "1851 Forward, a Newspaper's Development," The Mercury News, an Historical Synopsis. There were others. But Pressed for Time was my favorite because it suggests the unrelenting deadlines. Pressed as in a record because this presentation is a record. Pressed as in the presses through which flows the lifeblood, our many products. And each of you are often pressed for time even now. Consider this voice, the voice of a history, reciting a chronological record of a newspaper's progress over time. A history created by men and women of action, determination, ambition, opinion, and vision. This program is born of research and interest, but why bother? Perspective is important to our lives. It gives us balance and insight. We become a bit more appreciative, more tolerant, it's hoped, and with it, we can do a more intelligent job with the tools at hand. By acquainting ourselves with a solid foundation beneath us, we more confidently build day by day that new history which will be our own legacy. It helps each of us to know that what we do is important, is enduring. San Jose City historian Clyde Arbuckle said, "Not only is the San Jose Mercury Santa Clara County's oldest existing business, but in its role of providing information and molding public opinion, the Mercury has been the greatest single force in the county's history." Here now is Pressed for Time. The idea came to him quite suddenly. It was early December 1890. Charles Washburn Williams had owned the San Jose Daily News less than 10 months and would, in the following 25 years, prove himself an innovator. But what struck him that cold December morning was this: a special section filled with Christmas ads, and he proceeded to publish a 20-page section of them. That was December 1890, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We must go back to the year San Jose was stripped of the distinction of being the state's capital, 1851. San Jose had been under American rule for barely 5 years when John C. Emerson, publisher, set up shop at 55 West Santa Clara Street in a little shack. He called his 4-page Wednesday edition the San Jose Weekly Visitor. It would have taken more than foresight to see that his fledgling enterprise, with circulation under 300 in a town of roughly 7,000, would evolve over the next 13 decades to serve 325,000 households in a valley of more than 1,400,000 persons. The Weekly Visitor would, in time, become the San Jose Mercury News. J.C. Emerson's less than 2.5-year reign ended when he sold the Weekly Visitor to his editor and partner, Francis B. Murdoch. It was Murdoch, an attorney, who had renamed the paper the Santa Clara Register in 1852. And it would be Murdoch, ironically, who years later would do his very best to knock the Mercury out of its #1 position in the county.
Emerson and I didn't see eye to eye. He was overly impressed by anyone political, and he tended to meddle in my reporting. Still, in his defense, our moving our operation to First Street probably wasn't too smart. But now that we're back in Santa Clara, on the second floor of the Bella Saloon, I'm not so sure that we should have moved from 55 West Santa Clara Street in the first place. Putting out this weekly paper, writing, reporting, it's in my blood, and I truly love it.
Murdoch changed the name again in 1853. He named it the San Jose Telegraph, commemorating the arrival of California's first interstate telegraph line in San Jose. Following the outbreak of Civil War, Murdoch sold the telegraph to William Neal Slocum in 1860. By then, the county population had jumped to nearly 12,000. But Murdoch was not out of the newspaper game to stay. He would show up as owner and publisher of the Telegraph's chief rival, the San Jose Tribune, in 1863. And again with his two brothers 16 years later in 1879 as part owner of the Daily Morning Times. Between 1860 and 1880, the county's population would triple to roughly 36,000. Growth was an issue. The San Jose Tribune, which published each Wednesday too in the 1860s, would eventually be known as the San Jose News. Murdoch was not out of the name change game either. He changed the San Jose Tribune to the San Jose Patriot, and then to the Daily Patriot, and then again to the San Jose Daily Evening Patriot. Slocum, who bought out Murdoch in 1860, was just 31 years old, and he gave the Telegraph a name that had real staying power. It was also the only thing he'd become famous for. Slocum called his new paper the San Jose Telegraph and Mercury, in recognition of the, by then, famous mercury mines of the Almaden Valley area. In 1861, Slocum shortened the masthead, calling it simply the San Jose Mercury. As an interesting side note, Slocum's brother was a general in the Union Army who accompanied Sherman in his famous march on Atlanta. Slocum's reign as publisher and owner ended within a year. He sold out to a New York Republican in June of 1861.
I was a printer for the San Jose Tribune, a semi-weekly that competed with the Mercury. I always had a large interest in politics. My name is James Owen. My friends call me JJ. I was your state assemblyman for one term, and I liked it. But I felt that to really influence the area, to make changes and ferret out corruption, I had to publish my own newspaper. This area deserved better coverage, and Ben agreed with me. Ben Cottle was my partner. Things were coming to a climax between the conflict between the southern and northern states, and when the Civil War finally started, I felt that we should start publishing on a daily basis. The transcontinental telegraph lines were in place. Sacramento just got theirs, and we've had them here in San Jose since 1853. Our first daily edition was published on November 5th, 1861. But the folks around here weren't accustomed to buying a paper every day. So by New Year's of 1862, we went back to weekly publication. I tried again for a few months in 1869 when I bought a new press. Again, people just didn't buy it. The Mercury went to daily publication March of 1872. It became a daily to stay. And I'm very proud of that accomplishment.
Technologically, things began to change by the late 1860s. Emerson, Murdoch, Slocum, and Owen had all used the Washington hand press. In 1869, Owen brought in a new hand press. It gave more impressions with greater clarity on a 9-column page format. But that was not enough for Owen. By 1872, with 12,000 San Jose residents and nearly 30,000 throughout the rural Santa Clara County, he brought in his first steam-powered press. For Owen, innovation meant progress, and Owen clearly saw himself as progressive.
Benjamin Cottles, sold out to me in 1874. I incorporated as the Mercury Printing and Publishing Company. 10 years later, I sold out to Charlie Shortridge. That was after a quarter of a century of publishing a newspaper. I'm very proud of Charlie. I initially hired Charlie as an errand boy, but he was a very ambitious young man. This is a symbol of the fact that I was instrumental in establishing electric light power on the city streets of San Jose. It became known as JJ's Electric Light Tower. It became a symbol of San Jose for decades and made me a local hero, which was nice.
Owen was well respected throughout the valley. He wrote poetry, prose, essays, and his editorials were outspoken without being offensive. He also acted in local theater productions with a group called the Unity Society. He was known for his keen sense of humor, his broad-mindedness, and his honesty. The 1880s in San Jose were a terribly competitive period for those in the newspaper business. In 1880, Santa Clara County's population stood at 36,000. By 1890, population had jumped to 48,000, and during that decade, 5 new papers sprang up, and there were several one-page advertising flyers distributed. Ads competed with news on the front pages of legitimate news publications. The competing newspapers had various names. One was the Santa Clara Valley. Another was known as the Pacific Tree and Vine. And there was the Town and Country Journal and the County Journal. There was the Reporter, the City Item, the Weekly Argus, which became the Herald Argus. But the one paper that looked to threaten the Mercury supremacy was the Daily Morning Times. The Daily Morning Times was brought into existence in 1879 by the Murdoch brothers and Stephen DeLacy. Francis Murdoch, as you recall, was the San Jose Weekly Visitor's second owner in the 1850s, and now he was back to compete against the paper he once owned. A year later, DeLacy became sole owner and the Murdoch brothers faded from the local newspaper scene. DeLacy evidently did a good job with his new paper. It caught the attention of a rival, and as any smart rival might do in the world of business, this rival bought DeLacy out. A longtime employee of the Mercury, Charles M. Shortridge bought the Daily Morning Times from DeLacy in 1883 for $5,500. Then, in a move consistent with newspaper empire building, Shortridge also bought the City Item, a paper which would appear in 1885 as the San Jose Daily News. And then in 1884, he bought the Mercury from his longtime boss, James Owen. And then Shortridge added the Herald Argus.
My name is Charles M. Shortridge, and there were 2 things that I really loved: newspapers and growth. And you know, we had plenty of both of them in the 1880s. Another factor that really motivated me was my ardent interest in local politics. And I knew that in order to build a quality paper, we had to increase circulation and offer the public in-depth coverage of local politics. That brought me to the conclusion that consolidation would really benefit our community. So in 1884, I decided to buy the Mercury from Owen for $8,000. It just amazes me how much I got for it just 16 years later.
Shortridge renamed the paper the Times Mercury. But Shortridge's ambitious plans to consolidate and improve local publications outstripped his financial resources at one point, so much so in fact that in 1885, after having moved his operation to the north side of Santa Clara Street in a building designed for newspaper production, and having added a new double-cylinder Hoe press capable of 5,000 impressions per hour, he entered negotiations to sell the Mercury. The negotiations were with F.A. Taylor, publisher of a rival paper called The Republic. But the deal fell through within 2 months, and Shortridge continued to operate his newspapers until 1898. In 1885, countywide population had reached roughly 40,000.
One suggestion that Taylor made was that we rename the paper the Daily Mercury, and I decided he was right about that. Our circulation had grown to 2,500, and over the next 14 years, we published 8 9-column pages a day and 16 pages on Sunday. And to keep those steam engines humming, we burned a heck of a lot of cordwood. Hell, we had large stacks of cordwood in the press room at all times.
Shortridge was also responsible for organizing the city's first debating society. It was called the San Jose Lyceum. He faced financial problems once again, however, and sold the Mercury and the Evening Herald to a business syndicate headed by Clarence Wooster and Alfred Holman in 1898. But Shortridge did not have financial troubles after that. What he bought for $8,000 in 1884, he sold for $100,000 in 1898. He then went on to serve as a state senator from San Jose until 1906. (1898) was the year that linotype machines were introduced to local publishing, but it was not by Shortridge and his Mercury. It was by Charles Washburn Williams, publisher of the number 2 paper in town, the San Jose Daily News, which came into existence in the mid-1880s. Charles Williams, you may recall, was the first to publish a special section of Christmas ads in 1890. As for introducing the linotype, Williams wanted to send a message that the News was the most up-to-date paper around. In 1898, with the county's population nearing 60,000, the Mercury circulation stood at roughly 3,000. Williams' Daily News was at 1,600. Now we move to the opening of the 20th century. The next new owners of the Mercury would spend nearly half of it at the helm. Holman bought out Wooster early in the year 1900, and on Christmas Day 1900, Holman struck a deal with Everest Anson Hayes and J. Orley Hayes, brothers, both attorneys. The Hayes brothers were known by their nicknames, Red and Black. Well, Merry Christmas. The Hayes brothers had just bought themselves a Christmas present, the Evening Herald. But they had no idea that their 1901 New Year's celebration as new newspaper owners would be just the first of 51 that they and their family would celebrate as publishers in this area. Red and Black Hayes would be witness to extraordinary growth for a primarily agricultural Santa Clara County area. Population would grow from 60,000 in 1900 to 300,000 by the time they sold out in 1952. They and their sons would oversee distribution of a 24-page product in 1902 and a 96-page product by 1950. Who were these long, live men? Ownership and publication of a relatively small-town paper that was growing continuously certainly did not preclude other interests. Everett Anson Hayes, known as Red because of his red beard, was also an elected representative to the United States Congress from San Jose for 14 years, from 1905 through 1919. His interest in politics predated his San Jose residency when, fresh out of law school, he was elected to the City Council in Madison, Wisconsin, and later to the Board of Supervisors in Ironwood, Michigan. In 1898, just before buying the Mercury with his brother, Everett was president of the Good Government League of Santa Clara County. Everett Hayes was born in March of 1855 and would live well into his 80s. His entire adult life was marked by community involvement. His business interests spanned real estate, mining, fruit raising, and publishing. After moving to San Jose in 1887, Everett married and established his home in the Edenvale area, where he raised 6 children. J. Orley Hayes, known as Black because of his black beard, and the younger of the 2 brothers, also began his career as an attorney. In fact, his career closely resembled his older brother's, which makes sense since they worked together for their entire adult lives. It was J.O. who was most closely associated with the Mercury's operations. He raised 5 children and was an unsuccessful candidate for governor of California on the Republican ticket in 1918, as well as being an influential member of the state Republican Central Committee. He lived to be 90, passing away in 1948. Sons of both Hayes brothers would eventually take over the top management and day-to-day operation of the editions as president, vice president, and co-publishers in 1939. Having completed the purchase of the Evening Herald on Christmas Day of 1900 and the Mercury in August of 1901, the Hayes brothers established a single new plant to print their papers at 20 West Santa Clara Street. In 1913, they combined their papers and put the editions under a single name, the San Jose Mercury Herald. It was during the Hayes tenure that the San Jose Newspaper Guild, Chapter Number 98, was established in 1937. Guild membership hit 25 by the end of 37. 30 years later, in 1967, it stood at 400, and 20 years later, in 1987, at 870.
My name is J. Orley Hayes. In 1924, my brother Everest and I delivered a 48-page paper. In 1928, we built a new 3-story plant, and by 1930, we were putting out a 64-pager. In 1942, we moved to an even larger facility at 211 West Santa Clara Street. We saw ourselves as a full-fledged metropolitan daily. The population at that time was near 200,000, and we had just bought out the San Jose Evening News from the Payne family, who started their operations in 1873. We kept the Mercury Herald and the Evening News separate, but put out a combined edition for Sunday. We grew to love this area, and we are proud of the contribution of the professionalism in journalism that we contributed to the first half of the 20th century.
On July 25, 1952, sons of the Hayes brothers, Alistus L. Hayes, J.O. Hayes' son, and Harold C. Hayes, Everest Anson Hayes' son, sold the Mercury News to Northwest Publications, a newspaper chain from Minnesota controlled by Bernard Ritter. The Ritter group of papers had started back in 1892 with Herman Ritter's purchase of a German-language newspaper in New York City. It was Bernard's son Joseph who took over as publisher in 1952. The paper's only strike began on Valentine's Day in 1959. It lasted 4 months. In 1967, as the area's population neared the 1 million mark, the newspaper's operations were moved to what was once Moses Schellenberger's farm. The new address was 750 Ritter Park Drive. It was the world's largest single-story newspaper plant on a 25-acre site. The San Jose Mercury and San Jose News, owned by the Ritters, merged with the Knight Corporation, a Miami-based newspaper chain, in 1974. P. Anthony Ritter, better known as Tony Ritter, Joseph Ritter's nephew, became publisher in January of 1977 and president and publisher in 1979. Joseph Ritter formally retired in June of 1979. At this time, as we move toward the final decade of the 20th century, William A. Ott is publisher. He succeeded Tony Ritter in 1986 when Ritter moved to Miami to head newspaper operations for the entire 29 daily paper chain. The San Jose Mercury News, once the San Jose Weekly Visitor, is now part of a multi-million-dollar international information and communications company, publicly owned. This local paper, whose weekly circulation was no more than 300 in its first few years, and directed by a succession of strong individuals with varied interests, is now an integral part of a communications empire that touches the lives of nearly 100 million people a day. Its 1,300 full-time and 300 part-time employees work to put out its 10 daily editions, 6 for the morning, 4 for the afternoon, including the stock final. These same employees do their best to make the San Jose Mercury News live up to its promise, the Bay Area's best. Her roots go back to 1851, before the American Civil War, when apricots and prunes and iron ore held the promise of growth. The new press in 1872 cost $2,000. The new press in 1985 cost close to $10 million. The 1980s will undoubtedly be remembered as the period of computerization of the newspaper industry. But several new reader-responsive products published for the very first time in the 80s, as well at the Mercury. The weekly zone editions, Science and Medicine, Arts and Books, Venture Sports, Business Monday, Weekend, West Magazine, Computing, Commercial Real Estate, Religion and Ethics, and subsections to living, to name only a few. This presentation, it's hoped, will have given its viewer an appreciation of just how solid the foundation is, and underscores the importance of the work, the contributions of those who came before us and have since passed on. The basics remain: dedicated people, quality presses, new technologies, circulation growth, never-ending deadlines, and the public's need for information and the public's right to know. And a country where freedom is cherished. As long as these basics remain, there's work to be done. The Mercury News is one of 1,730 daily U.S. newspapers. This has been Rob McGovern, giving voice to your paper's history.